Welcome to the Consulting Success Podcast with your host, Michael Sapersky, where we take you deep into the world of elite consultants.
Hey everyone, it's Michael here. Hope you're having a wonderful day. And today I'm very excited because we have with us Stefan Drew. Stefan, you sent me a wonderful but short introduction, and I'd like to actually just have you explain to everyone a little bit about what you do. And before we do that, just want to welcome you to the podcast here today.
Thanks very much, Michael. Good to speak to you at long last.
Yeah.
Well, let me start with the background then. I'm basically a consultant based in the UK, working mainly within the education sector, the further education sector in the UK. But having said that, I do a little bit of work overseas as well within education. And I suppose 90% of my work is within education, but I think you can soon get sort of stale if you work in the same sector all the time. Mm-hmm. So I do work with a lot of other sectors as well from time to time, anything from international environmental organizations to national membership organizations to, well, this week I've actually designed and built a website, which is something I very, very rarely do, but for a local painter and decorator. He's a one-man band, basically. But, I learned a lot by doing it.
So varied, right? You're working here with higher education, some leading institutions in the education space, all the way down to taking on some projects for a local painter.
Absolutely, because that's what gives me the breadth. And I've got the stage now where I can pick and choose a lot who I take as a client. And if they don't excite me, I don't want to do it.
Right.
Basically, in fact, I won't do it.
How long have you been working in the education space?
As a consultant on this occasion for about 12 or 13 years, but I'd had a period within education previous to that. And I started working in education initially on a full-time basis as an employee back in the 1980s.
Okay.
I'm that old. I'm that old.
And so is that just maybe, I think a lot of people are interested in terms of the path of your journey. So just take us back to when you started your consulting business, whether it was 12, 13 years ago. Just what did that transition look like? If you can kind of fill in some of those blanks there for us, what kind of job did you have in full-time, and then how did that transform into you consulting?
I was at that time the head of marketing at a medium-sized further education college in the UK. Prior to that, I'd also worked as a director of marketing for two quite large colleges. Mm-hmm. And I'd also been head of press publicity and marketing for the second largest government department in the UK. So I had got a wide range of experience, mainly in the education sector. And I got to the stage where I'd been 5 years where I was. I had a new boss come in. Be honest, he and I didn't see eye to eye, mm-hmm. and one of us had to go, and he knew he wasn't going to go. So I decided to leave.
Right.
And I must admit, it was one of the scariest times of my life. I've been a consultant before, but suddenly being in a position of saying, I've got to do this now, rather than I want to do it at this stage, I've got to do it at this particular time, became quite scary, because I suddenly thought, when I started in education as a marketing manager, I was the first one in the UK to be appointed full-time. Mm-hmm. I knew very little, but it didn't matter because I knew slightly more than everybody else. But at this time, 12 years ago, when I decided to go alone again, I realized there were a lot of other people out there doing what I was doing. And I was beginning to think, well, do I have those skills? Because when I started in traditional marketing. Right. The internet was very, very new. We didn't have a website where I was working. In fact, there were only a handful of websites in the world. It was entirely new. I mean, fax was a big thing in those days. It's that long ago.
So, Stefan, what gave you the confidence to actually move forward? Because I think what you're sharing right now is a challenge, or at least a thought that comes into the mind of many consultants, especially in the early stages, but also when they make shifts within their business, which is, am I really good enough, right? Do I have the expertise to be successful? Do I have what it takes? So it sounds like you hit that point at that time.
I did.
What got you through it? How were you, what helped you to make the decision that, yes, I do have this, or I'm going to go for it?
Well, I was basically left with no choice. I had to leave where I was, and it was either, well, I had two choices. It was either take another full-time job or go into consultancy. To be honest, I'd had a gut full of working for other people. I really wanted to go it alone, and I had to sit down and sort of look back over my career and say, well, look, let's try to look at some of the successes I've had, and let's just put aside my fear. And that's tough. It's hard. I was at that stage fairly newly married, and I didn't want to admit to my partner at the time, my wife, that hey, I couldn't do this. I just had to say, I'm going to do it. I told her I was going to do it. And hey, I then had to do it, basically.
So with a stomach full of fear, you still took action?
I did, yes. And I did what looked like a wise thing at the time, but was probably quite foolhardy. Rather than focus purely on the sector I was in, the education sector, I had some experience. I'd been a non-exec director of a very large environmental consultancy. So I thought, well, I can focus on environmental consultancies and education. And let's just back it up with a third option of SMEs, small, medium-sized enterprises, and even corporates. I'll aim at everybody, in other words. So I set up 3 businesses effectively. Right. And I mean, it's a stupid thing to do because effectively what you do is to spread yourself so thinly you can't do anything properly. But to be fair, it worked out fairly well to begin with, because where I thought I was going to get a lot of work in the education sector, for the first 3 months, nothing came through the door whatsoever. I had no work for 3 months. And then I had 3 jobs coming in 1 week. That kept me going for some time. And then the education sector dried up and the environmental sector suddenly cut in. I landed some work with some very prestigious clients. By more luck than judgment, if I'm honest about it. I could claim it was due to hard work and diligence and such like, but there was a lot of luck went into it as well.
What did you actually do though, Stefan? For those listening, wondering, well, you know, when you launched and you had these 3 different kind of segments or different industries that you're potentially going to be targeting, what steps did you take to generate business?
All the usual ones in those days, you know, websites, set up an email list. I used foot leather. I went and saw people. I networked. I did all the traditional things. But to be honest, again, I was spreading myself too thin. Right. And I'd spent a long, long time working in marketing. And I suddenly realized at that stage that I knew nothing about marketing. I'd been very successful in marketing when I had an organization behind me. But working for yourself is a different world, isn't it? Definitely. And I went out and I found a guy that was running some marketing courses online. I looked at it. It was quite expensive, but I thought, well, he looks as if he's doing things a slightly different way. And I signed up for an online course with him. And, I learned more about marketing from this guy than I'd learned in the previous 20 odd years. Just a different way of looking at things, not taking things for granted, always questioning. Is there a better way of doing that? Is there a better process? And that really set the scene for the rest of my working life, I suppose, because now I don't take anything for granted. And today it's much easier to find work. In fact, I don't go looking for work very much. It finds me, basically. And I turn away work from time to time, quite often, in fact.
So, Stefan, I'm just going to jump in for a second because you're sharing a lot of really good stuff, and I wanted to break it down and just explore kind of each one. So you mentioned that you spread yourself too thin, but that it also kind of worked out for you. So looking back, for someone who may be in a similar situation right now, what would you say to them? Are you recommending that people need to have one clear focus and really just put 100% of their energy into that? Or is it okay for them, in your experience, to have 2 or 3 different segments or industries that they're targeting?
I would say today you need to focus very strongly. I think what I did was foolhardy. I was very, very lucky. And I got away with it in those days because there weren't that many people that were really expert at anything in marketing. There were a lot of people doing marketing. And that was part of my fear, was that a lot of people out there doing it. Hundreds and hundreds of marketing people in the world, right. Thousands of them, even in my country. Today, I think you've got to go beyond being an expert. I know a lot of marketing experts, self-proclaimed and otherwise. But I think today you've got to be seen as an authority in quite a small area of work. And I've been working recently with a colleague of someone you know very well as well, Ian Brodie, who's doing a lot of work. Yeah, very, very great guy, doing a lot of work on how to become an authority. And one of the things that I knew already and been doing for the last 12 years now, but Ian sort of codified for me really and sort of put into words, was that you have to have a very distinctive point of view. Just being another Me Too marketing person or Me Too consultant just doesn't hack it any longer, because all you're doing is competing against everybody else of similar vein. And you're really a commodity. You've got to be seen as being the go-to guy over that one particular issue. Now, for example, in this country now, I'm seeing colleges claim all the time they don't have enough money to do things with, funding being cut. I see that in a lot of public sector organisations. It's not just colleges, and that's not just this country. But you see, my distinctive point of view, and it's quite disruptive in some ways as well, is to say, actually, there's no shortage of money. You're just not spending it very wisely.
Right.
That doesn't go down very well with some people, of course. But if I then go on to explain it, for example, in this country, colleges tend to build vanity buildings, great big buildings that they only occupy for about 30 weeks of the year. 20 weeks of the year, students are on holiday or exams or whatever. So buildings aren't used very well at all. My view is that if they taught over 50 weeks of the year rather than 30 weeks, and restructured the whole of education, the buildings could be much smaller, less money would be spent, and you would have enough money. So that's a simple way of looking at it, and I think that applied in many, many businesses. So by being distinctive in my point of view and clearly upsetting some people along the way who say he doesn't understand, that's fine. But some people sort of look at it and say, well, actually, there may be a bit of sense in this. I need to talk to this guy.
Yeah. And what do you say to the people who, and even going back to your situation where you could apply your expertise to more than one area? So even though you had the background in education, you were able to apply it to environment or other areas. So for people who are looking at their business and saying, well, I have a lot more than just one area that I can offer. What's your experience there? What kind of wisdom can you share with them? Or even insight or observations as to why it's so important to hone in on one clear focus rather than going in 2 or 3 different directions?
Well, I think there, Michael, what I would say is don't spread too thinly. Instead of, as I did, going for environmental education and everything else, I would certainly know, if I was back in those days, cut out the everything else and just do 2. But I would then apply this distinctive point of view to both of them, so that I can apply that point of view to education and say, look, I can show you how to spend your money more wisely. In my case, my specialism is marketing, right, but it often spreads into management as well. I get called into a lot of other things. Well, often get called in to do marketing, but what they really need is management help before they need marketing. But I can apply that to the education or environmental sector. I could apply it to any sector, that point of view, in actual fact. But if I start doing that, again, I'm spreading myself too thinly.
Right, good.
So I will remain focused.
Stefan, you mentioned gratitude, right? That you feel kind of grateful. You don't take things for granted anymore. What really drives you to do what you do? You've been doing this for a while. It's not just your first few years. You've been developing your business. You've built it to a level of great success where you're able to choose which clients you take on. But what really drives you to do what you do?
Oh, lots of things. Basically, I love what I'm doing. And I think anyone that sets out to be a consultant, or in fact, does any job, if they don't really enjoy what they're doing, they're in the wrong job. You really need to look at what you're doing and say, this isn't for me. So the love of what I do drives me forward. I hate to see waste. So anything I can do to improve the sector I'm working in, to cut the waste, to improve the quality, and such like, great. I like to teach, consulting is a form of teaching to me, to help other people, that sort of thing. So they all drive me forward, basically. I'm now 65. I could retire. No thanks. I don't want to retire. I love what I'm doing. Now, I don't want to work full time either, to be fair. And really, for the last 8 or 10 years, I haven't worked full time. I work part-time. Because I actually believe that most of us work far too hard and there's no necessity for it. And if you're a good consultant and can get good day rates, then why do you need to actually work 5, 6, 7 days a week? Now, I know some people in their younger days may want to do that to build financial security. That's not what I've wanted in my life. I've got enough. I think we can have, you can be perfectly happy with far less than many people think we need. Having said that, I'm not poverty stricken either.
Where does that come from? Because a lot of people, I think, especially these days, you're right, are very focused on money. Very focused on the feeling of that they're doing enough, that they're spending their time, getting things done, checking things off a list, and your approach and what you're sharing over the last, you said, kind of 8 years or so, has been one that's very different than that. What makes you feel that way? I mean, why take that approach as opposed to what a lot of people do, which is the exact opposite?
Well, you see, I think what a lot of people do, Michael, is they work hard, earn as much as they can, and say, well, when I've got enough, I can then retire, go fishing, play golf or whatever. Mm-hmm. My view is life's too short for that. I want to go fishing and play golf now rather than later. And for the last, I moved to a rather nice part of the country over here some years ago. I go now walking a lot. I walk the beach, the cliffs, the hillsides. And I enjoy doing that. If I wait until I'm, another 5 years older, 10 years older, at whatever age you are, mm-hmm. then you may not last that long. One of our colleagues, another guy Mike Seddon, mm-hmm. Died last year. Mike was 52. Yeah. 51, I think he was. He'd worked hard in his life. I knew Mike very well. We used to go drinking together. But you look back and think, well, Mike did play hard as well. But if you're always working and you die, what was it all about?
Stefan, what was it Mike's passing that gave you, I mean, I think it sounds like you've been doing this from before, but I'm wondering what really caused it? What was it? Was it a death, of a family or a loved one? What really was the impetus for you to see things in this way, to really start appreciating and living life now rather than, saving and preparing for later? Was it something specific that happened?
I really don't know. I suppose it was maybe the fact that I remarried, 13, 14 years ago. I'd been married previously. I had children. Marriage had broken up. I'd been alone. Well, I'd had a few encounters along the way, but I hadn't settled down with anyone until I met my present wife, over a decade ago. Right. And I think at that stage, I suddenly thought, I haven't got time to waste any longer. I've got to live life for now, not for later. And I think that's been part of it, maybe. Right.
Good. Yeah, that's. I appreciate you sharing that. So you have, you're picking and choosing which clients you work with now. You're able to make a very good living, working part time. So things sound really, really wonderful. But I'm sure that you've encountered challenges along the way, as all of us have. For you, what stands out from a business perspective? What's one of the biggest challenges that you've faced as you've worked to grow your business?
I think probably the biggest challenge I had was about 6 years into the business. Although I'd slowed down and was doing less, that seemed to be working. But suddenly I had quite a dry period for, 6 or 7 or 8 months where very little work came in. Mm-hmm. And I had to sit back and sort of think, am I doing something wrong? And I don't know that I actually was, really. It was just one of those things that sometimes you get a dry period. Sometimes things aren't as good as you expect them to be. We know the dips and troughs, peaks and troughs that we all get in business. And I looked at that and I think my marketing then wasn't as good as it should be. Who's good at marketing, who's bad at marketing? Well, marketeers are pretty bad at marketing their own businesses very often. Mm-hmm. And I think I looked at my business and I thought, no, I've not been focusing enough time on marketing when I've been busy. Right. And I've got to sort of even out the workload in terms of marketing my own business. And I think that's where I started to bring in more of the distinctive point of view more, and trying to be doing something all the time, steadily. And one of the things I've done for 5 or 6 years now is to write a regular article for a leading website in this country that is really targeted at my sector. It's called FE News. It's aimed at the further education sector. Yeah. I got a feature on there once a month. I know the editor now very well again, but we live quite close together. We go drinking as well these days, which is always useful to get another perspective from that point of view. And good beer.
Is that the best source of your business now, would you say?
Yes, it is. It does two things in actual fact. That and LinkedIn, I think, is the other one that works very well for me personally. But again, you have to put the time and effort into that. Is it a lot of time and effort? A few minutes a day, probably. That's all. Okay. But writing the articles, I can write one good article a month. And that goes out to a lot of people, to the extent that I now quite radically, and this will perhaps not surprise you because you probably know this already, but surprise people that are listening, I don't have an email list any longer. I actually dumped my email list a few years ago. It was no longer working for me. And part of the reason it wasn't working was that a lot of the people I work with tend to stay in a job for about 5 years and move on. Mm-hmm. So you were getting a 20% degradation of the email list all the time, year on year. And suddenly, if you don't do anything about it for 12 months or more, you suddenly have a list that's got less and less value in it, which is a different situation to if you're selling a product where you're selling to the person on a personal basis rather than a business basis. Then they're using their personal email. That doesn't change, but business emails obviously change, each time someone moves on to another job. So I decided in the end to actually dump my email list, not have the hassle with it any longer, and to actually write far more for magazines and such like. Speak at conferences as well. That helps a bit.
Stefan, some people might, who are listening might say, well, yeah, but I don't live next door to the editor of my chosen publication, and I'm not, able to go drinking with them, right? So for those people who are not in that situation, how would you suggest, or just what was your experience of getting into that kind of publication? How can others maybe learn from your experience so they can position themselves in front of their chosen publication to reach their ideal clients? What are some of the best practices around that?
While we work with a lot of seasoned and experienced consultants here at Consulting Success, I'm often contacted by new early-stage consultants. Invariably, the question I'm asked is, what are the steps I should take to become a successful consultant and grow my consulting business to my first 6 figures per year? Well, I'm excited to announce that we've opened the doors for our Momentum program. This is our most popular program for early-stage consultants, and it has helped almost 1,000 consultants to start, run, and grow successful consulting businesses. It gives you the step-by-step plan to help you with your messaging, your fees, and pricing strategies, how to win more proposals, how to go to market more effectively, developing a marketing system to generate leads consistently, and so much more. And right now, until September the 19th, you can sign up for Momentum and get 50% off the regular price by going to consultingsuccess.com/audio. That's consultingsuccess.com/audio, AUDIO. Only 100 spots are available to join Momentum and get 50% off. This deal is only available until September the 19th or until all 100 spots are gone. We won't be opening up new spots in this program for several months, so don't wait. Go to consultingsuccess.com/audio. That's consultingsuccess.com/audio, AUDIO.
Well, when I started writing for this particular website, I didn't know the editor either. I was doing another part of the country. I didn't know him personally. He employed a few staff. I didn't know them. I just made an approach and said, look, I've got a point of view. You don't seem to be carrying much in the way of marketing articles. How do I get onto your list of writers? Mm-hmm. Do you want me to put a few ideas to you for articles, or would you like to see a specimen article?
Right.
And I approached them like that.
And did you get a response right away?
Yeah, I did, in actual fact. And I've done that with quite a few other magazines in this country. I mean, one of the biggest ones, Times Educational Supplement, I wrote to them a couple of years ago and said, I've got an idea for an article. Are you interested? And they said, right, send it over. And they used it, I know the editor there now, well, in terms of know him through email, no other way.
Right.
If I want to write another piece, I would just drop him a note and say, look, I got an idea about X. Are you interested? It doesn't take that much time. And I must admit, that takes me back to my traditional marketing days where I did a lot of PR work in those days, writing media releases, what we used to call press releases in those days, but I call a media release today because it's more than just the written newspaper, websites, all the rest of it. And I think that set me in good stead for what I do now, so writing articles. I've also got listed on a website that lists people with expertise in particular topics. So a journalist would go to the website, look for someone with expertise in, Google AdWords or websites or education or whatever it might be, and select someone from there. Lots of countries have these. I mean, in this country, it's expert sources. In America, it would be HARO, H-A-R-O, help a reporter out. I don't know what you've got in Canada, but every country got something like that. So getting listed on there is useful. Some of these places are paid for, others are free. I think it's a good investment to pay a few £100 to do that, certainly in my case.
Stefan, was it writing that got you out of that dry spell of, you were, as you shared, like in it for 6 to 8 months, right? Things just weren't taking off. And this is, I know, going back many years, but was it the writing that got you out of that? What was it that actually helped you to get through that time and ultimately come out the other side successful?
Several things. Writing, radio as well. I did quite a few radio interviews with the BBC. I dropped letters out to people. I emailed people. I phoned people. But that's sort of a cold calling way of doing things. And, of course, that's always the hardest one. So getting personal introductions has always worked very well for me. I've been very fortunate in that the first person I ever worked for in education, this sector, who was the youngest principal in the country at the time, has had a very good career in education. And in recent years, he and I have worked together a lot. In fact, we've worked together for 30 years, I suppose. And he's helped me build my profile. So tagging along with someone else that's doing something similar. He was a principal, I was a marketing director working for him, but that sort of relationship's always been very useful. I think it's about the people we know. It's our networks that help us so much. Things like radio, for example. I've done a lot of radio. I can't honestly say I've ever sold anything as a direct result of doing radio, but it does give you great credibility. I've published a few books. Do they sell anything? Not in my case, no. What I think happens there, certainly for me, is that there are a lot of people publishing books these days, and become an Amazon bestseller actually isn't that difficult. And if you say to someone, I've got an Amazon best-selling status, I've got a book or two, so there's a lot of other people, basically. It's Me Too marketing again. Now, it does give you credibility if you can put the book on someone's desk and say, can I leave this for you? You might find some interesting articles in there and maybe even, mark a few of them for them to read. That gives you credibility. On its own, it's never sold for me.
Right. So it's the credibility, it's the exposure, it's the visibility, it's the authority that the content, that whether it's radio or articles or books that you're putting out. But a lot of people might look at that and say, yeah, but you're not, generating direct revenue from it. So what keeps you going? I mean, just maybe from a mindset perspective, why continue doing those things if you're not seeing a direct connection to it?
Because indirectly they work very well. They do give me credibility and profile.
Right.
One of the things I had a client many years ago. He was an architect, in actual fact, who I went into the office one day and he said, I'm going to introduce you to the team this morning. And as he introduced him, he said to them, I want you to meet Stefan. He's our marketing magician. And I listened to that and I thought, marketing magician, that sounds fantastic. I'm going to trademark that within a day. I trademarked the phrase. And then one of the things I've done over the years is to keep that going, because when people interview you on the radio, for example, or even with you today, a day later, a week later, people probably won't remember my name, but they may well remember the guy was called the marketing magician. And that's worked extremely well for me. And again, it makes you stand out a little bit more. It gives you a bit more visibility. And all these other things give you visibility. One of the first big interviews I ever did for radio was something that taught me a lot. And I was in Berlin in November 1989, the night the wall came down. To be in Berlin when the Berlin Wall was coming down was, you were part of history being there. You were living through something you suddenly thought, hey, every day is history in some senses, but this is history that people will remember. So rather than just sort of sit there and enjoy it, which I did, I did something else. I went to a call box in the middle of Berlin and phoned my local radio station back in the UK and said, who have you got reporting in Berlin? And they said, well, the BBC have got someone there, but we haven't got anyone. We're just a small local station. I said, you have got someone there. I'm that person.
Right.
And within 3 minutes, 2 minutes probably, I was actually on air from a call box in Berlin, being interviewed by the presenter in the studio back in the UK. And again, it's taking those opportunities and sensing an opportunity and using it, building your profile all the time. Did that bring work direct? Of course not. What it did bring me was the opportunity to write some articles and some chapters for various books people invited me to write in. Again, it builds profile.
I think I'm sensing, a lot of these examples, Stefan, come back to you building momentum. So even though that one action or activity doesn't create a direct result, it builds momentum that then layers onto something else, and ultimately there is a result. And so if you hadn't taken that first step, you wouldn't have gotten the result. But a lot of people might look at that and say, well, yeah, but it's a lot of work, and I don't know if it's going to actually pan out. And even if they tried it, they might stop because they wouldn't see the result right away. For you here, if you were to start a brand new consulting business today, what would be the first thing that you would do to really move the business forward, to start growing and gaining that momentum and generating revenue? What would be that first step that you would take?
I think the first thing I would do, I'd go back 6 months before I started up the consultancy and start building visibility at that stage. I think trying to start on the day you start your business is almost too late. You've got to somehow build up a profile before that in the employment you're already in, so that people can turn around and say, yes, I know that person. That when you go out on day one, in fact, I've got a friend of mine now, I can't give any details. He handed his notice in last week as a senior executive in a very large company. His staff doesn't know he's going yet, so I can't reveal clearly who he is. But he's now working. He's working a 6 months notice period. The staff will get told 3 months in that he's being, and the job will be then advertised. But he's already started to build his profile now. He's got a good profile where he works as an employee and as a senior executive, but he's now beginning to put feelers out and say to people in the sector, people that he's known and trusted for some years, is just to let you know, I will be retiring from my present employment fairly shortly, in 6 months' time, and I will be looking for work, and we need to have a chat sometime about how you and I might work together.
Right.
So it's about putting that sort of seed out there before you even start, and then building that momentum. So he's got time now to build a website. He doesn't have to launch it immediately, but he can get it built. He's got time to put together all his brochures, everything he needs, all his marketing he needs, and his contacts he's got time to do now while still employed. And I think if you try to start just on day one without any preparation whatsoever, which I suppose to an extent is what I did, and it took me 3 months to get my first work in, it almost proves that that doesn't work very well. So it's preparation, I think.
But a lot of people these days are looking for that instant win. They're looking for the kind of going with your marketing magician. They're looking for magic, right? They're looking for the one thing that they can do, or the secret strategy that will somehow give them that first big win or that next big win. But I think what you're sharing, what I've observed myself over business many years and working with hundreds of clients, is that rarely is it just one thing, right? It's many things and consistent action that you're taking. So, just to those people who might be looking for, like the one strategy or the one step that they can take, what would you say to them from your own experience?
There isn't one. I don't think you need to work very, very hard for many, many, many hours on marketing a business, but you do need to work every day on marketing a business and consistently. And that might only take a few minutes. So going back to networking again, it's easy to link with someone, say, on LinkedIn that, looks as if they might be interested. In fact, a friend of mine phoned me only yesterday and said, great, I've just linked with this guy on LinkedIn. He's the chief executive of a very large company I've been stalking for years. I'd love to do business. Mm-hmm. What do I do now? He's linked with me. Right. And I said, what you do not send him a sales letter now. Stand back, think it through. And what I was advising him was to say, well, look at the groups he's in. Go into those groups, stalk them for a little while, have a look and see what's happening. If you can make a sensible comment on a group discussion mm-hmm. that he might see, or comment on something he's commented on, then gradually you start to see you become higher profile. You become part of the wallpaper in his life almost. Yeah. And at some stage you might see, I would be looking on his website all the time, seeing what they're doing, checking the news, and there's lots of ways you can automate that with technology these days, from Google Alerts and lots of other things to get news on a company or individual. Yeah. If I could see something that was relevant and I had something useful to say or advice to offer, I would send it to him. It might be as little as a newspaper cutting that you cut out of a paper, put in an envelope and send to them. It might be that you just scan it in and email it to them. But just a note saying, I know you're expanding at the moment. I thought you might find this useful. Or I know your industry is going through such and such a hassle. Here's what another industry is doing with the same problem. Anything at all like that, just to raise your profile. It's not going to be the sort of slimy sort of way of doing things that we see some people do, but genuinely, and it comes with a genuine want to help people. If you want to help them, then you'll do it the natural way. If you try to force it, it really doesn't work at all. Yeah, it gets seen the wrong way. It looks sleazy.
What's I think interesting though here, Stefan, is that oftentimes the right way to do it, where you're spending more time actually cultivating a conversation and a relationship, it can take more time, right? It might not be as quick as just blasting off a promotional message and talking about yourself and how good you are. And that's what a lot of people revert to because they don't have the patience, all right? We're in a society these days where in most places everything is instant. And so we're looking always for what can we do right now to get a result right now. But the business of consulting is really about relationships. And Absolutely. So, right, it's putting in that time and cultivating those relationships and strengthening them that, yes, it can take more time, but as long as you're doing it the right way with the right approach and you're doing it consistently, as you've said, that's where the magic really starts to happen, doesn't it?
Yeah. And I recall right early on when I started, I wrote to quite a few college principals. One, I emailed her in actual fact and said, I'm setting up in business of my own. We've not met, but I thought you'd be interested. I know your sector very well. And she came back within 20 minutes and said, come and have a coffee with me. And I went and had coffee with her. We had a long chat for an hour and a half or so, which, hour and a half of a chief exec's time is a lot of time. Definitely. And at the end of it, she said, well, I'd love to do business with you, but you're just too expensive. We're a relatively small organization. There were several million, but she thought they were small. I can't afford to do business with you. Too expensive. So I said, well, okay, that's fine. I understand that. Times are tight. But can you just go onto my website now a moment and sign up to my newsletter? In those days, I was doing a newsletter. I just started it. Mm-hmm. And for 17 months, she read my newsletter quite avidly. I sent her the occasional sort of note, newspaper cutting, as I was talking about just now, that sort of idea, things like that. And I had a phone call one morning from her PA saying, can you come and see Heather? Ideally today or tomorrow. She needs your help. And I went along. I actually said, well, I'm far too busy actually to come. I can come Friday. Went along and she said, one of the first things she said was, this is a problem. When can you start? Mm-hmm. And I said, but wait a minute, I'm too expensive. She said, you were then. I wasn't desperate then. I'm desperate now. Yeah. But it's because, and I said, but you still don't know me. She said, I've been watching you for 17 months. Mm-hmm. I do know you, and I know you can do it for me. I know who else you've been working for. I've done a bit of checking. You've done some work for so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so. I need you here now. Can you do it? So that cultivating really does work long term.
It does. Well, Stefan, thank you so much for sharing all this. One quick question here for you that may benefit others. What is one book right now, or a resource, but book ideally if you have one that you've enjoyed recently on the topic of business or business growth that you think others might enjoy as well?
My goodness, I wish I'd known that question was coming. Let's think. Book called Persuasion. I don't know if you've come across that one. Mm-hmm. I can't remember all the details now, but I've just ordered it. Of all the books I'm reading most, I'm reading cookery books, believe it or not.
Yeah, I know you're a foodie.
I'm a foodie. But there are some lessons in cookery that for us as consultants, and I'll share this instead of a book, maybe. One of the things that chefs do, and I work with quite a few chefs now, I've been in the kitchens, been trained by a few in cooking, they do mise en place, to put everything in its place before they start. They do the preparation. Everything is prepared before the oven goes on or the pan comes out. And then it's just a matter of adding things to the pan as you go along to the dish. There's no dashing off and saying, oh, do I have that ingredient? Oh, we're out of it. What shall I do instead? They have total preparation. So based on the books I've been reading recently, lots of Indian cookery books in actual fact, then I would say preparation is what I've learned from those books.
Love it. Good stuff. Stefan, really appreciate your time and you sharing with us here today. For those that want to learn more, I know you don't have a newsletter, but for those that want to either reach out to you or just kind of see what you're up to, what's the best place for them to connect with you?
My website, stefandrew.com. That's STEFANDREW.com. Or just look for me on LinkedIn. That'd be great. I'd be delighted to link with anyone that wants to. And feel free to reach out.
Wonderful.
It's been a pleasure.
Thanks so much, Stefan.
Thank you.
Are you ready to take your consulting business to the next level? Learn more about the Accelerator Coaching Program at consultingsuccess.com.